Aubrey, if we look at what we've seen thus far, and seemingly we don't have a common understanding at this point of what this national shutdown was meant to be or achieve.
Well, as I said, my primary understanding is that you opt for a shutdown as a tactical option, primarily to shut down the economy. While it is still early in the day, I think it's becoming clearer and clearer that the goal of shutting down the economy has been achieved by the EFF. Now, of course, we must remember that in the cut and thrust of propagandizing, we see the security cluster responding to an imaginary shutdown. So at the moment, we're dealing with two shutdowns. The shutdown imagined by the president and his security cluster, which is an imaginary shutdown, and the real shutdown. Now, in terms of the real shutdown, what has not materialized are the hordes of barbarians who support the EFF, who would have unleashed all manner of instability and mayhem upon the country. That has not happened. But to the extent that President Cyril Ramaphosa and his security cluster tried to impose an imaginary shutdown, if you look at the number of soldiers and police and the nature of the security deployments we see right now, what they are responding to and what they are part of is an imaginary shutdown.
So one of the criticisms, and this is also coming through in the responses to our question of the day, is where people say we are under siege as a country from criminals on any given day. And yet, we haven't seen this sort of response to people's cries for government to deal with crime, as an example. So how do we respond to that?
Well, let's put it this way. George Floyd is murdered by the police in the United States of America. People come out in protest. Yes, there is looting. And yes, there is damage to property. In the response to the looting and damage to property, there is no attempt to deal with the reason behind the looting and the reason behind the burning and damage that is caused to property. Because property matters more to these people than it does. I mean, than human life. So property matters more than human life. So you have a situation where the statue of a slave trader is thrown into a river. What does Boris Johnson do? He does not deal with the reasons why. It is the statue of a slave trader that is thrown into the river. He focuses exclusively to what he characterizes as the vandalism of throwing that statue into the river. Now, come to crime in South Africa. As I've been trying to do the whole morning, I've been trying to explain on the forces on whose behalf this deployment is happening. And I have argued, and I will continue to argue, that the response of the president and the response of his security cluster is motivated by a desire to defend primarily the interests of capital, not the interests of the ordinary South African citizen who is afflicted by crime, poverty, inequality, and other signs of underdevelopment. So you, Sakina, as a South African citizen, do not matter to the president. You, Sakina, do not matter to the security cluster. And yes, what we're seeing now amounts to wasteful expenditure because you have a security cluster that is deployed to an imaginary situation as part of a process of demonizing those who have decided to engage in this form of protest this shutdown. So the ordinary South African who is afflicted by crime does not matter. And that is why the security cluster and the president are not going to deploy the security forces in the manner that they do. What matters is to defend the interests and the property of capital. And this kind of wasteful expenditure, this kind of deployment is therefore in order, in defense of those interests.
So about 3,400 SANDF members have been deployed in addition to the South African police services on the ground. And that deployment will stay in place, I think, until next month sometime. We'll just get you further details on that.